It's my pleasure to moderate this panel on getting started in quantum. My name is Shekhawat. I'm a tech entrepreneur in Chicago, and we have a highly accomplished panel here with people leading quantum initiatives in industry and academia, people who have worn hats on both sides of the fence, and it's my privilege to kick off this discussion. I will try to speak as little as possible, but why don't we begin with my request to the panelists is introduce yourself just in a sentence or two, your name and your current role, and also let us know where you're calling from, because I know we'll get at least one exotic answer here. So with that, in sequence, Mark, maybe you can go first.
Sure. I have two roles in the quantum world. One is as a professor of physics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I do research in quantum computing and also work on the supply side of training people for the quantum workforce. My other role is as a scientist at Cold Quanta, where I'm on the consumption side, and we're always looking out to hire talented people to help accelerate our quantum work. And I'm calling in from Madison today.
Brian?
Thank you. So I'm Brian DeMarco. I'm also a physics professor, but at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I wear a few different hats. Like Mark, I'm a researcher in the field. I work on quantum computing, quantum networking, and quantum simulation. I'm a director of one of the new NSF Quantum Leap Challenge Institutes. And I'm also here in my role as the associate head for undergraduate programs in physics at Illinois. We have a large undergraduate program, and I've been thinking a lot about academic programs over the last few years.
Thank you. Kayla?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Lee. I currently work as a growth product manager at IBM Quantum. So my main goal is how can we grow our quantum and QIST community. In the past, I've also worked as a consultant, so focused on how enterprise clients can get started with quantum computing. And I'm calling from the exotic state of New Jersey.
Thank you. Roman?
Hey, hi everybody. So I'm Roman Orus. I also have a double role in the quantum world. I'm a research physics professor at the IPC in Spain. It's a theoretical physics center where I do research on quantum computing and also on quantum many-body systems. I'm also the scientific director of Multiverse Computing, which is a startup based in San Sebastian in Spain and also in Toronto. And we do quantum computing for finance. And I'm calling from the exotic place in Spain called San Sebastian. Yeah.
Thank you. Will?
Hi, so my name is Will Zhang. A lot of us have two hats, which is kind of fun. I think it shows just how much is going on that we don't have enough people. We all have to do multiple things. So I'm another one of those. So I run a research group at Goldman Sachs. It's a relatively new group working on quantum algorithms and applications and research there. And then I'm also part of a nonprofit called Unitary Fund that supports and works in open source and in quantum technology.
Thank you. Taha?
So hi, thank you all for inviting me to this. I run one of the large AI and machine learning groups here at Scotiabank in the exotic locale of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And my background is like many of the people on this panel, physics with a sprinkle of quantum mechanics, if not a lot more. But my true background is over the last 20 years, I've been a hedge fund manager working in the proprietary trading space. So I have a lot of different hats that I wear in my function, but one in particular, which is to basically give the AI and ML world inside the bank on the capital market side advanced analytics in all kinds of forms, especially quantum.
Thank you. And finally, Yuri.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Yuri Aleexev. I'm a computational scientist at ArgonneNational laboratory. I work at supercomputing center called ArgonneNational Computing Facility. And my interests are, in general, quantum algorithms, quantum simulators, and also scientist at the University of Chicago.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you all are getting an echo from my audio, but let me kick off the first question, and this will be, Taha, I'm going to direct it to you. From a practitioner's point of view, you work at a bank, and I wanted to see if you could provide us some insight from the bank's point of view. So why is the bank looking at quantum, for instance, at this point? And what are some of the areas you're looking at? If you could shed some light from inside the bank, that would be great.
So inside the bank, the interest for quantum computing it covers the entire spectrum of I'm sorry, I think I'm getting double speaker. So it covers the entire spectrum of leadership from the top down. Most of the interest is on the cryptography side, and that really is to start looking ahead and being quantum ready for the point in time in which privacy of our clients might be under attack by the ability to break the encryptions that we're using now. But in the process, in the meantime, and everyone appreciates that it may take a lot longer to get there, there is a desire to solve a number of value-added problems today that we can start doing based on all the interesting things that we saw in the earlier panels, whether it's on the optimization side or on the risk assessment side. There's a whole number of things that we want to apply the technology for today. The reason the bank is looking at it, and it's not just for the sake of our customers, and a lot of things that we do is for the sake of our customers, but it's looking at it because they want to be ready for the boom that will happen at some point. We know that there is that it's coming. We're seeing the interest across the board, not only from our clients, but from the reverse inquiries we're getting from a number of places. And it's the time to start thinking about it seriously. The applications that we're looking at, the applications we're seeing people dive into, they fit perfectly within that capital markets finance framework of things inside the bank. So to answer your question concretely, Jay, it's that the interest is there, the value looks like it can be added now, and it will future-proof us in the future for all the kinds of security risks that we think may be on the rise with the rise of this technology.
You've, Taha, a quick follow-up. You mentioned when we last spoke that there's very little appetite for big thinking in this area on the bank, and these initiatives need to have tangible value. Do you feel that these areas you mentioned, cryptography, portfolio management, simulations, etc., you're able to present them as having near-term tangible value?
Many of them, yes. Some of them, no. So, for example, on the cryptography side, the value is a pretty easy one to state, and it's more of an insurance type of value, right? You don't want to see that situation, because if a bank exposes the privacy of its clients, you know that could be an existential threat for the bank. And so you think of it more like an insurance type of value that's there. But for other things on the optimization side, for the risk estimation side, these things are things we know how to value because we're in that business, right? And it's something that's there now. It may not be comparable to things that are in the GPU space or in some of the things we're doing on the machine learning side today. But given the rapid advancement in quantum volume and looking at the advances we're making, it's not hard to forecast just out a few years that we might be in a situation where the technologies intersect or become comparable. And then on top of that, you know that there are capabilities on the quantum side that we may not be able to replicate on the classical side. So it leads us to think of a whole new class of problems that people just haven't thought about. But valuing is not the hard part. It's making it tangible so that the executive can see that it's real.
Thank you. I'll come back to that in a bit. Will, if I can move to you as another practitioner, you wear two hats. They're both very interesting, but thinking of your role at Goldman, what sort of applications is Goldman most interested in? I assume some of the same ones here. And also, how is the firm thinking about quantum readiness from a workforce perspective?
Yeah, so it is early days. So we are interested in not just there's the cybersecurity concerns that Taha brought up, but there's also the potential for this to be an extremely useful computing technology. And there are hard computing problems across the firm in optimization. One that we've been focused on and we'll be having publications on more recently, coming up soonish, is on derivatives pricing. But it's, the task is to make the application more concrete. So today, what's understood are that there are complexity advantages, there are theoretical advantages that could happen in some cases, but exactly how good of a quantum machine you need to achieve business value is mostly unknown. I mean, we know how good of a machine you need in order to factor prime numbers to break encryption, but we don't know exactly how good of a machine you need to do business problems well. And so that's an open research area, and that's where we're focused. We're trying to work backwards from metrics that we understand and do resource estimation on how good of a machine do we need. And there's all these details about what those metrics are, noise, number of qubits, different architectures, different error correction schemes that need to be considered in order to get to business value. So that, because, and then to go to your workforce question, because it's really a research question, we're, the team here is an algorithms and research focused team. We have access to a lot of different hardware that's available, but actually much of the work we're doing now is more theoretical. It's resource estimation, it's algorithms development and design and optimization. And so for the work that kind of work is, I think, uniquely some of the work that does benefit from having a PhD. Now that said, and I hope we talk about it a lot more in this panel, there's a lot of other areas where the path that I took, which was, PhD in quantum technology and then research in quantum technology, isn't necessarily the only path available. And I've seen a lot of success in other areas from folks who take different paths.
Great, thank you. Another quick follow-up here. Can you talk a little about the Unitary Fund? It seemed to me it's a nonprofit, as I understand it.
Yes, we've been around for about a year.
Tell us a little bit.
So before joining Goldman, I was at a startup called Rigetti, and with IBM about similar times, I led product and software there, and we put quantum hardware available on the cloud with free open source software to access it. IBM did the same thing, and that's become a pattern. So now, whereas I got into quantum by doing a PhD, and it took a long time to get involved, now you can pip install some Python libraries and run on some of the most advanced hardware that's available from a bunch of different players, and we're only going to see more of this happen. And so that shift to accessibility leads to a hypothesis that, well, maybe we can help folks use those tools and use open source as an on-ramp into quantum technologies in general. And that's what Unitary Fund, the nonprofit, is organized around. So the first program was to give micro grants to people to contribute into open source quantum software. We give small amounts of money, sort of quick application process. But it's been really, really successful. So we've funded now 30 projects in 14 countries, 4 continents. 1 venture funded startups come out, to be 8 publications on the research side, and now 7 people who have a full-time job in quantum technology whose first thing was a Unitary Fund micro grant. And we were able to do all of that whole micro grant program, for about the cost of a single all-in graduate student for a single year. And I think what that speaks to, and programs like that speak to, is how useful a robust open source ecosystem is for drawing more talent into the field. At Unitary Fund's also doing some other things now. We're actually building some open source libraries. We released one called Mythic recently. But I'm really emboldened by the accessibility and the growth that can cause happen in our field.
Great. Thank you, and we'll come back to that a little bit more when I get to Kayla and some of the work she's doing. But for now, Roman, if I could move to you, this is a little bit of a transition. You straddle the fence, so to say, between academia. You run a lab. You're also involved in a quantum computing company. I think it's Multiverse, where you were co-founder. You work with financial institutions a lot. Dozens of banks. Could you give a view of how, from an academic perspective, you're working with financial institutions and helping them prepare for the future? What are they asking you for? Just a view from the ground there.
Yeah, it's been actually quite a challenge, because coming from academia, we in my case, I'm a physicist, and we are used to our language and so on. And when it comes to entering and convincing financial institutions that quantum is important and that they should have a look at all their problems and so on, you somehow need to change the register, and you need to take the language as well. I think that we've been doing that quite well in Multiverse, because some of my co-founders, they also come from the finance perspective, and also from the finance field. But overall, I will say that I see the financial institutions quite open. So they understand that this is a new technology that is going to be important in the next years. Actually, it's going to be faster. It's going to come much faster than what everybody expected. They also see that they need to learn a lot, and I will say that some of the institutions are already building their own teams and so on, whereas other institutions are more relying on some other people to tell them exactly what they could do and so on. But what I see is that at least the big institutions are starting to get interested. as I said, they are building their own teams. They are starting to do some pilot projects, playing with the first quantum processors that are available and so on, and trying to identify what are the relevant problems inside of the bank that they could solve, okay? That's something that is not easy at all because, with quantum computing, since it's a different way of thinking, one needs to rethink what is solvable, non-solvable, and probably they have problems there that they just forgot about them, that they just thought that, okay, this is absolutely intractable, that nowadays once we have more powerful quantum processors, they should be able to solve. No? So as far as we have very positive, banks are getting more and more interested, and also financial institutions every day. And I have the feeling that at least the top banks, as I was saying, they are already able to build their own quantum teams, and they are already very, very, very competitive. Yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up there? What does a team look like? So when a bank wants to build a team, who are these people? I'm presuming they're not a collection of PhDs in quantum science or quantum physics.
Yeah, I think what the bank does, the first thing that they do is, well, there are many physicists and mathematicians working in a bank, and and then they just go to their physicists. Probably they are these quantitative people, doing quantitative finance. Many of them are physics graduates or even PhDs and so on, and they try to find the inside expertise. Okay, who knows about quantum here? Is there somebody? And then around that, they try to build their own team. So, for instance, in the banks that we've been working with in Spain, it's mostly the people that take care of innovation. Okay, these are the guys that that just take care of okay, let's explore new ideas, blockchain, quantum computing, AI, and so on. And they try to build a team around that. And they try to hire or at least look inside of the bank people who actually know something about quantum, and they start from there. Okay. But in some cases they are building actually quite a strong team.
Thank you. That's a good transition to you, Brian, who has, I think, both feet in academia, and not that far from where I live, a respected Midwest institution. You've spoken in the past of talent shortages and new ways to think about the pipeline and so on, and you run programs that are actively training thousands, perhaps more physicists and other students here. How do you feel now about the talent shortage, and could you share some thoughts on the models needed to remediate that?
Sure. So I'd say there's definitely a talent shortage, and this is a problem across many R&D sectors, not just sort of quantum technologies. Quantum technologies may be hit harder since it's still an immature field, right? And we're still learning what these machines can even do. So when I look at the field and try to think about potential solutions, what I see is that we just heard this field has been propelled forward by PhDs in physics for a long time.
Yep.
But I think that's not a viable model as we move forward and try to get to the point where this has real economic impact. It takes a long time to train a PhD physicist, and it limits the talent pool and the diversity of people that can contribute. And we need a great diversity of people to move the field forward. And one of our undergraduate students in physics here, Shreyan's actually asked the question that helped just crystallize my thinking on this, which is how and when do you see a lower barrier of entry? And I think that's an open question. I can look back to history a little bit. For example, the history of CS at Illinois. It formed as a splinter from physics. There was a group of physicists who went off and decided to form a computer science department. And they had to iterate for a while and think about how to grow academic programs that really reduce that barrier to entry, right? And starts abstracting things that you don't have to have 5 classes in quantum mechanics and graduate quantum mechanics to contribute. In the same way that a computer scientist doesn't have to worry about the band structure of the transistors. I think the problem we need to solve is that problem, lowering that barrier of entry and abstracting the tools to the point where the barrier of entry is low. And I don't know what the answer is to this. I know that many people are thinking about this. We're thinking about this. University of Wisconsin's been thinking about this. Kayla's been thinking about this. A lot of people have. I think we're still waiting to see what the answer is. And based on history, it will take some time to find it.
Okay, I'm going to hold a question around textbooks and such for you, and also when I get to Mark. But But thank you for that. Kayla, if I can shift to you, you have an interesting background. So I think you have a PhD in molecular biology.
Yes, I'm a biologist in a room of physicists.
Yes, and isn't there some sort of hierarchy? It's the mathematicians who think everything else is useless, and then it's the physicists and chemistry, and then biology, and then eventually you get to people who do application programming. So I feel for you, but give us IBM perspective. You're, besides being a hardware maker, you're a consulting firm that teaches large clients how to think of it. You've spoken in the past about some sectors you're active in, the automotive sector, obviously financial, chemical. Give us a view on what you're actually doing with your clients and what are they asking you for?
Sure. So at IBM, we often brag about being a full stack company where we're designing the hardware, we're designing software. So we have an open source software package called Qiskit. We have an applications team that is thinking about what can we do with it? And then we also have the services on the top. Oftentimes clients start with the easy questions. What is it? How will it help my business? When will I see a return? And so really the work that we start with is understanding their problems and how it relates to what they can do now, and then how we think they'll see value later. There's a lot of work we do with clients on building the team. So the first question people ask are, well, what skills do we need? Sometimes it's great because they'll have that physicist that's already in their office that can now finally use their degree from 15 years ago. But the more realistic question is, well, what do my data scientists need to learn in order to be an impactful? How many of them, right? And so we think the answer is more than one, but probably not 100 yet. And really thinking about like what problems they can solve, what team they can start bringing together to do that. And then what things can we do now to convince their leadership that it's worth the investment? And I think that that's the part that we spend a lot of time on. Like, sure, we can do portfolio optimization, but is it that interesting with 4 assets? And so what sort of roadmap do we have to build for clients so that we go from we've built the team, they've learned new skills, and now we can start demonstrating what this technology can do. So that's sort of the client perspective.
Do you have an ideal client? What does an ideal client look like at this stage?
At IBM, we love working with the researchers. So those that have a pretty strong research background, they're interested in not just the business problems, but like the research of quantum computing, right? That is the interesting part. Like, how can we think about this problem slightly differently? And you have to have interest in research, because if you're only limited to how will this be valuable for me today, you might not be as excited. So I'd say that the researchers have a strong background, and certainly the clients that can commit time to learning some of the new skills, especially as we build out the technology to get to the point where we've abstracted away some of the more complex concepts.
Okay, great. And I'll come back later and we'll talk about education, diversity, that sort of thing. But to move on with my questions, Mark, if I might ask you, I'm not going to ask you to explain the fuzzy qubits at the back, but what I am going to ask you is that you're one of, I think now 2 people on this panel that are actively working in academia and at a quantum computing company called Quanta is the firm that I believe you're the chief scientist at. Could you provide a perspective, so which makes you on the supply side of quantum talent and on the buy side of quantum talent? That's a unique position. Could you offer your perspective on how you're thinking of what you should be producing for industry, and then what industry actually needs to buy at this stage?
Sure. So for me, one of the take-home messages from the sessions this morning, where we heard a number of very interesting talks covering different aspects of quantum and finance, was that in fact there's a big disparity between the finance world on the one hand, who's sort of chomping at the bit to use these quantum algorithms to start attacking finance problems, and the relatively primitive state of quantum hardware. It's just, we heard multiple times, the hardware is not yet available that we would like to have to run these algorithms on. And so this picture behind me on my Zoom background of this array of atomic quantum bits, that's a few years ago, it was just a physics experiment. And now both at the University of Wisconsin and also called Quanta, we're trying to turn that physics experiment into a real machine that we can use to attack scientific problems, but also make available to customers to solve applications in finance and other areas. And then you can ask the question, well, what talents do we need to accelerate that transformation from physics experiment to real machine? And what's remarkable and also a lot of fun about quantum is the just very broad range of capabilities that we take advantage of. So just to further develop this machine, we need optics specialists who can design a better lens. We need electrical engineers who know how to program an FPGA for classical data processing and control of our classical system. We need computer scientists who can take those algorithms and compile them in a smarter way or transpile them along the lines that Fred Chong talked about this morning to take advantage of the specific features of our hardware. So we need many different talents. And my feeling is that really what we need to do is get out of the mold of just thinking of training physicists, where this field perhaps started, and look more broadly at giving a range of people a grounding in quantum science and quantum technology at the same time that we cultivate their specific talents. So I feel like there should be a broad platform of quantum knowledge combined with specialization, because there's not one shoe that fits all, and we indeed need many different capabilities in this field.
So when you speak about giving a range of people qualifications, is this, we talked about this briefly, are we rewriting, inserting chapters in, say, the economics textbook and the engineering textbooks and such? Is that the direction you'd go down?
No, so I can give you an example of how we're approaching it in the context of the master's program in quantum computing that we established at Wisconsin a couple of years ago. We're now in our second year of that program, and there's quite a few places around the country that are starting or will be soon starting other related master's and certificate programs in quantum engineering. And our quantum master's program starts with an introduction to quantum computing, which of course uses quantum mechanics. But you don't have to be a world famous physicist, super expert in quantum mechanics in order to understand how quantum circuits work. And the mathematics behind the basic working is mostly just linear algebra. So we actually start the course with a review of the basic mathematics, the linear algebra, and leave the finer points of quantum mechanics to later on. And we try and make qubits and gates and quantum circuits accessible to as broad an audience as possible without requiring that they already have advanced training in physics. And so, the textbooks that are needed to do that, I think, are starting to appear. They're not really there, but really we're just using materials that we're developing ourselves in-house.
Thank you. And now Yuri. Yuri, I think your microphone you're on mute. I wanted to ask you, Yuri, if you could talk a little bit about your own entry into quantum computing. It's a non-traditional entry point. I think you came to the field via high performance computing, and you worked on simulation of quantum systems. So maybe it's interesting from you're a person who didn't necessarily study the quantum computing side, but this is an interesting case example of how you got to quantum. So if you could speak about that, and then also a little bit about the workforce challenges at Argonne and what you all are doing there.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so my background is actually quantum chemistry, but I was doing high performance computing for many years. And so I'm partially funded by this exascale computing project. It's actually $1.8 billion. It's a massive actual investment by government. And the idea here is that to keep essentially US competitive in actual science technology, we're essentially building these large supercomputers. And we enable science of them. But we actually looking like a long actual universe. So right now we are building exascale, but we actually see in future that quantum computing actually, it will not compete with classical computing, but the way we see it, it will basically complement. And we kind of, it will take a long time to kind of these technologies to merge, but in many years to come, it's actual possibility how it will evolve. And one direction why how it can evolve is that quantum computers will essentially become accelerators. So you can imagine it will be some kind of large supercomputers, and we'll have a cluster of quantum computers, and they're kind of all working together. And that's basically my perspective. And how I entered in this field. Initially, it was actually the top management actually was very interesting to see how actually what potential quantum computing. And I think actually a lot of actual colleagues from financial world actually and many other companies are actually wondering actually what is the potential with technology. And this is exactly what is my precise entry point in this field. And over time, it kind of evolved. And now I'm doing actually development of quantum algorithms, and I'm also involved in National Quantum Initiative and work with Mark Safman and DARPA projects to try to see how we can actually demonstrate quantum supremacy, quantum advantage. And this is where exactly we need both high performance computing and quantum computing. Because as you remember from that supremacy paper, to demonstrate quantum advantage or actual supremacy, you need to actually have direct comparison against high performance computing system. And
thank you.
To this end, this is why we develop quantum simulators and doing actual development of algorithms.
Okay, I'll come back to that later, but I wanted to maybe throw open a few questions to the panel for whoever would like to take them. And the first one is about advice you might have for industry on best practices in getting started with quantum. And I know a few of you, Taha, you and Will mentioned a few things, but anybody who'd like to go, maybe just sort of a top best practice that might be a pet peeve or something you've seen. So I'll just open it up to whoever would like to take that.
Sorry, you say me?
Go ahead, Taha, you and then Roman. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, well, I just would like to comment that about best practices for entering into quantum. Well, maybe first thing is to, if you come from industry and you are in a company, first thing that you have to do is to identify the problems that you have, that you think that that could be solved with quantum computing, essentially the ones that you don't know how to solve because they are just too hard, okay? And then try to identify people inside of your company that know something about it and start learning. I think that there are many resources nowadays that one can use, many meetings that you can go, many people with whom you can talk, okay? Try to get in touch with key people that know about quantum computing, because it's always easier to learn if you have a colleague, okay, that can explain you and solve questions for you and move on. I think that people shouldn't be scared about quantum, let's say. I mean, it's sometimes it impresses a lot of the equations and all that, but well, I mean, one can learn it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Taha. You were going to say something.
Yeah, so I agree with both those points, but I think one of the things that I found the most successful in terms of building a practice for doing quantum inside the industry was actually building up champions from the leadership. And so as opposed to focusing on a lot of the great talent we have inside the bank who have PhDs and have the capabilities, moving it forward internally was really a question of getting the leadership behind things. And so a lot of the effort, at least at the front end, to actually get something moving was about finding those executive sponsors, getting them to understand where this thing was going. You'd be amazed at how balanced and how forward-thinking they are. And they're just looking for an opportunity to engage. But if you don't go out looking for them, even identifying problems and identifying talent kind of just sits there, right? We learned this in the AI and ML boom of the last 6 years, in that we've had lots of science experiments, but not necessarily too much tangible value. Well, all of that is changing. And it comes down to the executive leadership buying into not just the vision of what we're looking at, but the potential value. And once you have that, it really becomes an unstoppable avalanche of activity and things to look at. It takes time, but I found that to be the most useful thing in terms of putting things forward and making things move.
You've said in the past that the banks have a sense that they were late to the AI party. Do you think that's influencing how they think about quantum?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think what they're looking at quantum as something new, and it's something interesting and something potentially that, again, could affect our customers. And remember, our focus is so much on giving our customers value that they always worry about those kinds of things. You just have to remember that most of these big institutions, these banks are huge, right? And their profits are enormous. And so when and if, they don't tend to be first movers in anything. They tend to be, they tend to be the followers. They tend to wait for something to happen. And then if they do get far behind, maybe they'll just go buy a company that does it. And then that's how they catch up very quickly. So no, I don't think there is that sort of urgency that somehow they're going to miss the boat. But I do see that they are forward thinking and looking at ways to, they've seen where AI and ML can take us. Can quantum do the same thing? The same thinking will go for things like blockchain or for any other advanced something new that we've never seen before. It's the same thinking. It's the same strategic vision.
Thank you. I want to switch to the discussion of the talent pipeline that needs to be built, and maybe I'll address this to the academics on the panel. We're having this discussion about quantum as if you're working with a fully prepared adult professional, and then hoping that some among them are a fit. But looking forward 10, 20, 30 years here, what does one need to do at the STEM level, at the university level, to create a talent pipeline? And I'll address this to Mark and Roman and Brian to begin with.
So I can talk a little bit to things we're thinking about the University of Illinois. Mark described a master's program at Wisconsin, and there are several universities starting to stand these kinds of programs up. I think that's definitely an element to fill the talent pipeline, as you described it, Jay. But we really need to think across a wide range of age groups, right? So we need to think from the master's level down to the undergrad level, right? So one thing we're starting to think about at the undergraduate level is, again, lowering this barrier and looking at history about how this works. So, we're starting with something kind of easy. Our current idea is to deploy what are called concentrations in different degrees across aligned departments here, right? So we're starting with electrical engineering, physics, and CS, where there would be some common courses that undergraduate students would take after an introductory physics course, which they all take, to get some of that baseline knowledge that Mark described and common lingo and sort of basic tools. And that then can lead them into more advanced directions if they want, or maybe that leads them into getting prepared. That plus an electrical engineering degree makes that electrical engineer, for example, that Mark really needs at Cold Quanta. I know there's a lot of thought also going into the K through 12 pipeline, right? Because unless you generate and spark that interest, you won't get the scale of people you need at the undergraduate level, graduate, and master's level. So there's a lot of outreach programs going on now. There's a new Q to Work program that OSTP has launched to provide resources for teachers. But that's a really tough nut to crack because at the K through 12 level, there's a lot of constraints from state licensing, from the AP exams in high schools. So how you work all around that is a problem, I think, that remains to be understood.
Let me add to what Brian said. I think another aspect of broadening the pool of trained and interesting people is enabling early exposure between your academic training and industry. And so some good examples of that have already been put in place are this triplets program that Margaret Martinosi mentioned this morning, funded by NSF. And so UChicago has been one of the places that has been implementing that, where you have triplets of students working at a university, taking their degree at a university, working with an industry colleague and or a national lab group. And that's giving people, hands-on exposure to what it's like to do R&D in an industrial environment. So that's a good aspect of it. And also in the quantum centers, Brian's leading one of the NSF centers. We have the two DOE centers in the Chicago area. There's also a lot of cross-fertilization there between academic, national lab, and industry groups. And I think that part of it is really a great enhancer of getting people into industry pipelines.
Great, thank you. Roman, any view from Europe or from?
Well, it's actually very similar to what has already been said. I think the important thing is to promote new masters, let's say, for instance, education at the universities on quantum engineering. We're actually doing some initiative like that here together with the Faculty of Computer Science, because we have detected that the people are really interested in quantum, and sometimes what is lacking is the people that actually can go and teach. No? And so we are trying to build a new master program on quantum programming. I know that there is also another one on quantum engineering here in the Basque Country and also in Catalonia. I think that there are several initiatives around Barcelona. Now, more broadly speaking, in Europe, I think that there are quantum programs at different universities. And I think that this has to be linked somehow to the quantum industry. So these people in the end are going to be the ones that will be hiring in our startups and so on. So it's normal that that the startups should pop out at the places where the universities can produce people that know what quantum technologies, and also all these types of masters and so on should take place where the people want to build companies. Okay, that's more or less what is happening in Europe. I think that still more initiatives like that should be provided, especially when it comes to financing of new startups, which is and also of companies on quantum technologies. Because in practice, according to what I've seen, this is actually what is moving the field forward. Okay, more than academia. So all these private companies that are really pushing the thing, and then the academia just follows. Okay.
Yeah. So since we're talking about talent, I'm going to shift slightly to the idea of inclusive opportunity here and ask a couple of questions about diversity, equal access, etc. And I'll begin with Kayla, and then I'll ask Will to put on his unitary fund hat and talk a little bit more about that. So the question, of course, is, this pandemic that we're in the middle of has just sort of exposed, unfortunately, this digital divide across the planet. And living here in Chicago, we have a substantial population on the south side here in Chicago that has, many of them have really suffered because they didn't have access to functioning Wi-Fi. So the remote learning, has obviously become a problem. Now we're talking about quantum computing. And Kayla, could you speak a little about what IBM and you personally are doing with diversity, inclusion, and equal access?
Sure. So I'm a graduate of a historically Black college or university. We generally call them HBCUs. So about a month ago, IBM launched the IBM HBCU Quantum Center. So it essentially brings together 13 HBCUs, like over 30 faculty, right? 200 students that are really interested in learning more, and really creates a roadmap for what they can start thinking about. So we're working with faculty on how they can start incorporating quantum technology into their active research, right? Like, you're doing materials discovery. This is what it might look like in a quantum space. We're working with students on this is what a career could look like. For me, casting a wide net is a bit more than how do we also get the computer scientists thinking about it? It's how do we get the people that actually don't know about all of the jobs? When I started undergrad, I was a biology major and I knew I didn't want to go to medical school. So even the idea of getting a PhD and what sort of careers came with that weren't clear to me. And so for us, it's about making sure that students know what's out there and what opportunities are available. At IBM, most of our content is open source and accessible. I think that's a great start, but it's not everything. So the thing that comes after access is opportunities. So the students that we're working with are also partnering with a lot of the other quantum centers, most of them, where they're essentially like, hey, we're also committed to diversity. How can we work with you? So they're providing like internships for students. They're working with our faculty, because those are the sort of things that people need in order to also be included in this space, right? And sometimes it's easy. It's, Kayla, this author is on the paper and they work at IBM. Can you introduce us? right? And sometimes it's that simple, but that's sort of the work that I've been thinking about when it comes to this group of people that's honestly historically excluded, and how they can also be included in the space so that we can create a more level playing field.
Do you ever feel the itch to get back in the classroom and teach them yourselves?
I have a lot of itches. Sometimes I'm like, no, how did I end up at IBM? Clearly I was supposed to be a professor, but we'll see. I think I'm still young. That's what they tell me.
Well, you are young, objectively, and certainly in this group, you've got less miles than certainly me. Will, could we get your comments on access, diversity, inclusion?
I'm muted. There we are. So look, we have a chance at the beginning of a new field to set the tone and to set the culture. And so that's one that we should seize. And I think that's just sort of the starting context here. And one of the things that's happened is that things have have begun in a relatively accessible way. But I really liked how Kayla put it, which is after access, you need opportunity. And so one of the things that's sort of one way to frame what Unitary Fund does. Because there's a lot of open source software out there, you can contribute, you can build up something that shows your ability to contribute without requiring you to have access to the traditional, sometimes expensive, sometimes exclusive credentialing mechanisms that we use throughout other parts of society. But how do you know what to contribute? How do you know what's useful? And if you contribute something, how do you have a network? I mean, that's what Unitary Fund's trying to help with. So we give some funding and micro grants, but actually, I mean, that's obviously very useful. It can go a really long way in places like Eastern Europe or Africa or India. But on top of that, we give them a network of mentors and advisors who are looking at their project and saying, this is useful. You should spend time on this. And if it goes well, then we can help introduce you to whoever you need, just as Kayla was putting it. And so what we really like about the program is you don't have to have any credentials. I mean, anyone in the world can apply, and that's why we've seen so much breadth. And as much as there's lots of regional competitiveness and some geographic competitiveness that's starting to sneak into quantum in different ways. And sometimes that's good because you can get motivated around it. But we shouldn't lose sight of other areas where anyone from anywhere really contribute here. And we have such hard problems that, I mean, there aren't really any quantum software engineering degree programs yet. Right. So if someone can show their chops by doing a project, then that's the best credential that they could ever have.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to get to the software piece in a minute, but first, you touched upon something where these initiatives that are taking place. It's great that individual companies are doing them in small funds, but the scale of the opportunity, certainly in places like China and others, they're tackling it, and it's also Canada. They're tackling it at a national level. There is a government level effort. And this I'm going to address to whoever would like to take this, but what is the role of the US government in marshaling this enormous network of resources, whether it's through the NSF, through IBM, Microsoft, others, and I think there's a initiative called Q2 Work that exists. So could we talk about the role of government in being an accelerator? Addressing it to the group in general?
Maybe I can actually say a few words. Yes. Since I work for government, it seems appropriate. I think the role is really actually at this point is more organizational actually, because as you can see right now, it's not only DOE, it's also actually NSF, DOD, multiple agencies actually participate in that. Each of these agencies actually have typically their own quant program, and there is actually considerable challenge to coordinate all these efforts. You certainly don't want to duplicate these efforts. You want to complement them. And it's kind of like jigsaw kind of puzzle where you see it right now. And at the same time, it's not only coordination, and it's also kind of setting up like the long-term goals as well. I think we kind of need, it's a very large field in reality, and it seems like the direction is slightly different. For example, it seems like in Chinese side, quantum networking actually was kind of had high priority. In US right now, actual computation sounds like has high priority, but maybe to switch actually. And I'm kind of like, for example, initially there's a lot of effort done in computational science, but it seems like now it's kind of shifting a little bit in the area of quantum networking, and I think it's very important actual application. And maybe Brian actually can talk about that. Actually, what is actually government view on this quantum network built at the national level? And this is probably what is actually going to be needed actually in the near future.
That'd be great, Brian. And if you could also speak about Q2 work a little bit.
Yeah, so I think Yuri put something very well, which was that a really important role for the federal government right now is to coordinate. You know, in our system in the US, we have all these different agencies and they can often be very siloed. And I think, as Yuri said, there's a lot of synergy there. And entities like the National Quantum Coordination Office, which lives inside OSTP right now, can really help, you know, align all these efforts. You know, also, I'll come to Q work in a minute. I think we shouldn't shy away from the importance of infusing money in the right way, right? So I think the NSF has done some things, and Margaret talked about this, which are really smart in terms of their convergence accelerator programs and things like the Quantum Leap Challenge Institutes, really identifying high-level challenges and focusing people and effort and excitement, you know, to try to overcome those barriers. And I think the federal government can really contribute there too, because they can really focus resources and bring people together. And so that really helps. Programs like Q2Work. So Q2Work is a program being led by two PIs, one here at the University of Illinois, it's Emily Edwards, and then Diana at University of Chicago. You know, the goal there is to work with industry and other stakeholders to really think carefully about this quantum education problem, you know, and articulate the challenges and then start collecting resources. And I think that's something also where a federal level effort is very, very helpful, because it can really uncover a lot of hidden gems and bring them together and then distribute those so more people can benefit. So I think that's another way the federal government and a program like Q2Work can really help.
Actually, Jay, can I ask Brian a question on
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Yeah. You talked a little bit, I think a little bit about departments and disciplines as being maybe a barrier. So I have 1 degree in physics and CS. I know a lot of people who are in this field that are mutts like that, and you can end up, it can make it hard to build a research career when you're sort of fighting to be between departments. And other countries globally, like the Netherlands or Australia, England, are sort of starting these quantum engineering departments. Is there something that government could do, and that takes a long time, to accelerate that particular process here?
I don't know the answer to that question, but now I'm going to go away from this panel and think about it, actually. So I think that question deserves a lot of thought. What I'd say is that sometimes there's this sort of what are basically simple institutional barriers. You know, at state universities, there's a lot of hurdles you have to jump through and approvals you have to get to start new programs. You have to be very careful to think about opportunities for students in placement. And so that's why we tend to have these splinter groups. You know, historically in the US, you tend to have things that splinter off of a department and then grow into its own thing, where they prove over time that there's student interest and placement opportunities. And that's just because of the way our system works. So, you know, just thinking about the way our current system works, I think I want to think a little bit, and I don't have an answer about what the federal government or other entities could do to remove those barriers and make that a little easier and go faster. And I'd be curious to hear if anybody here has any ideas about that.
Brian, will there be a QIS degree? Or is there a QIS degree, or will there be one anytime soon?
Well, I think, you know, places like University of Wisconsin, there is a master's level degree in this area. At the undergraduate level, you know, the reason I'm being hesitant here is that we always think first about our students. Okay, so we think first about, are we giving our students a high value and creating opportunity for them? And I think I don't know the answer to that question yet. For example, for students at the University of Illinois, were there to be a QIS or QISE degree? And so this is why I keep backtracking a little bit and say, I think there needs to be a little bit more time here. So for University of Illinois, not yet at the undergraduate level, but I think you'll see many master's level programs emerging over the next 5 years.
And Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right, what Brian said. I mean, universities tend to be very conservative and cautious in terms of modifying their degree programs and going in new directions. If you're not a believer, you might think, well, we're heading into a quantum winter, and then all this effort to start a new degree program would be in vain. I don't think that's going to happen, but universities are generally cautious. And just to give some context to that, we were the first out of the gate in Wisconsin to have a professional master's degree in quantum computing. It took about 5 years to get that to happen at the university. We realized 6, 7 years ago, this is something we ought to do. There's a need for it, and there will be a growing need. But it took 5 years plus to get it through the university. And that's just that, and that's not unique to Wisconsin. I think it's like that everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think just to add one little bit, we should keep in mind that global context as well. There is a bachelor's quantum science degree in Sydney right now that just got started. In the UK, they're in their second 5 years of quantum technology PhD programs. So there are, and maybe they're wrong, but it's just good to have a sense of that it could happen faster, and it is happening faster in other places.
That's right. There's also
PhD.
a master's degree in Zurich at ETH.
Yeah.
So it's coming. Yeah.
And plenty of PhD degrees. Obviously, Canada is one of them leading the charge here. Since we're speaking on the tech side, could we speak? We just have a few minutes left, but there's an important topic here, and that is software. And from a lay outsider's point of view, the discussion around quantum has really sort of focused on the speeds, what's real, that sort of thing. But what is the state of the software, and is that an area that's going to be competitive? From my perspective, it seems like it's all ending up with extensions of Python or modifications to Python rather than brand new languages. Is that accurate? What is the state of the industry there?
So there's huge need across a vertical spectrum for software in developing quantum systems. There's the high-level algorithms, mapping problems onto quantum circuits, Qiskit, many other applications that do that, and then all the way down to controlling low-level hardware, electronics, FPGAs, optimizers. There's a remarkably large amount of software that goes into just keeping our fragile quantum hardware happy. One of the speakers this morning showed this example of the quality of IBM's qubits varying over time. Maybe that was Fred. And so there's a large amount of software behind the scenes that isn't doing the quantum algorithm and isn't directly interfacing with the user, but which is keeping that quantum machine happy. So it's really a combination of quantum and classical capabilities. Do we need new types of classical languages to solve this problem? I don't think so. Do we need new quantum languages? Maybe not new languages, but we certainly need ongoing work in compilers and transpilers and optimizers that really connect the algorithm to the hardware in a way that does the best possible job with imperfect hardware resources.
So you don't will there be? You don't expect there will be new end user languages, off the type of say the Pascals and the Cobals and Javas that have come along, steadily improving along the way.
Well, it's hard to predict what people will develop, but I do think there's a need for something more intelligent than the way we write down quantum circuits today, which if you look at a digital quantum circuit description, it's very primitive in a sense. You just have these horizontal lines going across the graph, and you want to do some very complicated operations with this relatively simple description. And I do think there's a need for some smart people to invent something better to accelerate progress. I don't know what that's going to be.
Yeah, I'll underline that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that is I'm getting the signal for we're out of time. This has been a tremendous discussion. I've learned a lot. I'm going to have to go back and replay all your responses here. But panelists, you've been wonderful. So thank you very much.